we get up to Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph, and officially we're up to the third line. At the end of that third line, V'lemole. But let me just backtrack a little bit. We have a case here on Chav Zayin Amud Beis of two Achim that died, Bazecher Zeh, and Reuven was married to Rachel and Shimon to Leah. So two brothers are married to two sisters, and they fall for Yibum after Shimon dies to Levi. And Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion that if Levi were to give chalitza to Leah, then he could be miyabim Rachel. And the reason for that is because Rachel initially, when she fell for Yibum, that was before Shimon died, and Leah fell for Yibum, when she was a one-man show, so to speak, one-woman show, then there was a heter Yibum. So even though subsequently when Shimon dies and Leah falls for Yibum to Levi, now she becomes a chos kukaso, meaning Rachel now goes into a state of Isur. But if you could remove the Zika to Leah by giving Leah chalitza, and that's what Levi should be doing, then Rachel reverts back to her original state of het. That's Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara asked the question from a Mishnah. The Mishnah seems to indicate that shtehen cholzos, that there's no possibility of Yibum. Why is that so? And Rabbi Yochanan was so baffled by this question for the Mishnah that he said, I have no way of understanding this Mishnah. And as Mitch mentioned yesterday, the name of Rabbi Steinsaltz, apparently Rabbi Yochanan was raising the possibility that this Mishnah is not reliable. There's some mistake in the text of the Mishnah. And we started an entire sugya, which we're in the middle of now, as to why Rabbi Yochanan couldn't have figured out how to square away with the Mishnah. And one possibility was that the Mishnah was concerned with the possibility that instead of Levi giving Yibum to Leah at stage number one, he might switch it around and inadvertently give chalitza to Rachel and think that he could marry and be miyabim Leah, which would be a big mistake. And therefore the Chachamim, and this is what Rabbi Yochanan L'chorich should have answered, the Chachamim were concerned about the possibility that if we advocate that Levi give chalitza to Leah first, it might come out that switching it around, Levi might accidentally give chalitza to Rachel. But the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan was not happy with that interpretation, that the Rabbanan made this gzeira, because Rabbi Yochanan argues that in the case of a gzeira d'Rabbanan, with regard to the mitzvah of Yibum, that's only lechatchila. If all things are equal, we're going to recommend to Levi that he give chalitza to both Rachel and Leah. But with the Eved, in an event that Levi took the initiative and he did give chalitza to Leah, we should allow him to be miyabim Rachel. And the Mishnah seems to assume that shteim cholzos, that there's no possibility of Yibum in any situation whatsoever. And that's called, in the language of the Gemara, deleka din Yibum hacha klal. And those are the last words that we studied yesterday, that the language of the Mishnah implies that there is never a possibility of Yibum at all. And if we're arguing from the perspective of a gzeira d'Rabbanan, then at least b'di'eved, in that scenario where Levi took the initiative on his own, he didn't ask the Bezdin for a recommendation, and he gave chalitza to Leah, he should be allowed and even obligated to be miyabim Rachel. And the Mishnah says, leka din yibun klal. So now the Gemara raises the next question as to why Rabbi Yochanan didn't defend himself with the kasha of Rabbi Yossi from the Mishnah in the following way. V'lei, why couldn't Rabbi Yochanan say the following, that the Tanav HaMishnah holds Ein Zika? And if Ein Zika, now you have to come up with a whole new explanation as to why the Mishnah rejects the possibility of Yibum. The logical reason that we thought for rejecting Yibum is because of Yesh Zika. And if Yesh Zika, then when two sisters fall for Yibum, each one is Achos Kukasa, which is like Achos Ishto, insofar as Zika is a Miktas Ishus. But now we're reinterpreting the Mishnah, and we're holding Ein Zika. So let's understand, if so, why does the Mishnah preclude Yibum? What's the basis for the Isur Yibum? Gzeira Shemayamus the Asur Levatel Mitzvahs Yibumin. We had this far in the past. Let's go over it again. There's a concept called Bitul Mitzvahs Yevamot. And based on that concept, as we apply it here to our case, we're going to prohibit Yibum to Rachel. Rachel, remember, fell for Yibum first with the death of Reuven. And let's say that Leah received Chalitza from any one of the brothers. After Leah falls with the death of Shimon, Nefila number 2, Nefila Shnia. And what's going to happen? Af shekan ein chashash de bitul mitzvahs yibum. He says that in a case where one of the brothers gave chalitza to Leah, the second sister, the second Nefila, l'chora, at this point, we don't have to worry about bitul mitzvahs yibum. Why? Because now, according to Rabbi Yochanan's logic, Levi could be miyabem Rachel. So the fact that, I'm sorry, did I get that right? Levi could be, yeah, I got it right. The fact that Leah, the second Nefila, the second sister, received Chalitza, that doesn't have to undermine the mitzvah yibum. So there's no bittul of mitzvah yibum. But afal gavdi ein chashash the bittul mitzvah yibum, me'achar v'tam zeh eino yadua lakol. Okay, the logic and principle of bittul mitzvahs yibum is not something that is common knowledge. Is chasheshu chachamim shem yatiru liyabim achar chalitza. If we would allow Levi to be miyabim Rachel after Leah received chalitza, which is exactly what Rabbi Yochanan's position is, shema yavo lahatir liyabim gam kodem chalitza. People don't realize that the heter here to be miyabim Rachel was because, first and foremost, before Levi was miyabim Rachel, Leah received chalitza. They don't know that, and therefore they might come to think that you could switch the order around, and they're going to allow Levi to be miyabim. Again, this is all based on the premise, Rabbi said, that I mentioned yesterday, that somehow Yibum and Chalitza is not coming under the supervision of Bez. It comes from a spring. It's a spring from a grassroots movement amongst the citizens. That's the premise here. So now they're going to allow Levi to be miyabim Rachel even before Leah received Chalitza. Okay? Which means that if Levi would be miyabim Rachel before Leah received chalitza from one of the other brothers, like we said, there was a fourth brother, Yehuda, that's a problem of bitul mitzvahs yibum. What does that mean, bitul mitzvahs yibum? When you have two Yevamots that fall for yibum, we want to guarantee that each one could have the possibility, the potential of being misyabemis, of having yibum. Now, it's counterintuitive, because wouldn't it be the lesser of two evils if at least we have one yibum? Meaning, if we allow Levi to be Miyabim Rachel, okay, you're right. That's going to preclude the possibility of Yibum in the case of Leah, as far as Leah is concerned. But so what? At least you gain one Yibum, better than nothing. No. The halacha of Chayshinon Lebitul Mitzvahs Yibum means that we'd rather have 0 Yibum in order not to exclude one Yevama from Yibum, rather than have 1 Yibum and exclude the other Yevama from Yibum. As I said, it's counterintuitive because you and I would have said logically, let's get at least 1 Yibum up and going. Okay, so we'll exclude the other one, but we can't actively exclude the other Yevama. Is lachein gazer rabbanon sheklal lo yeh yibum b'shtei achios. We can exclude yibum from both achios because of the possibility that he would be miyabim Rachel before Leah was excluded from zikas yibum through chalitza. And if he switches around the order in that way, that's called bittul mitzvahs yibum. Aval kishemeisa Leah shenafla shnia. Now what happens when Leah dies? We established that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if Leah dies, right, we had 2 options. One was Leah got chalitza, and then Levi could be miyabim Rachel. The other option was that Leah unfortunately passed away, which means that Rachel is no longer an achos of his kuka because Leah is already in another world. She's not kuka liyibum. Aval k'shemesa Leah shenafla shnia muteres Rachel shenafla rishona l'syamim kevin shetam misa yadua lakol v'ein ligzar shema yavo lahatir liyavam below misa. So again, just to summarize, the Gemara is now offering another alternative answer to defend Rabbi Yochanan from the Mishnah and justify the Mishnah's ruling that both Rachel and Leah are excluded from Yibum. Even according to Rabbi Yochanan, who's of the opinion that if you could remove the Zika to Leah by one of 2 ways, one of 2 methods, either through Chalitza or if she dies, then Levi is allowed to be Miyabim Rachel. And now we're suggesting that the Mishnah is reflecting the sheet of Ein Zika, and the entire reasoning of the Mishnah to preclude Yibum has nothing to do with Rabbi Yochanan's logic. It has to do with Bittul Mitzvahs Yevamot, which means that if we allow Yibum to Rachel, even though we should do so after the death or the Chalitza to Leah, we're afraid that mistakenly he will be Miyabim Rachel before we exclude Leah. And if he's Miyabim Rachel before he excluded Leah, that undermines the principle of Bittul Mitzvahs Yibum. And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan lemisa lo chayish. He says the reason why Rabbi Yochanan balked at this answer and explanation of the Mishnah that we're not going to allow Yibum because of Bittul Mitzvahs Yibum is for a different reason, because Rabbi Yochanan holds the lemisa lo chayish. Al kochach shemafarish mishum yesh zika. He doesn't have the option of worrying about the possibility that maybe Leah would die, and that because of that possibility, they're going to get into the mindset, that you could be miyabim Rachel. V'leimalei, the Gemara asks, Rabbi Yochanan could have answered another parents that our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer. Who is Rabbi Lazar? Who the Amar? In a case later on at Daf Kuftes, Megarish es Ishto, if a man divorced his wife and then he remarries her, which he's allowed to do, and he dies. And Rabbi Lazar says, Kevin sha'om da olav sha'achas be'isur, is Nesra olav olavis. So what's the case? At the moment of Gerushin, the first Gerushin, right? her relationship to the Yavam, again, Reuven is still alive, but if we calculate what would be if Reuven would die, then his wife Rachel is Eshes Ach to Shimon. Narvas, he remarried her, and then he died. After he remarries her, she becomes a Yavama. But Rabbi Elazar says we're going to exclude Yibum. Why? Because she already had a relationship of an Erva vis-a-vis Shimon, the Yavan, in that interim period between the first Gerushin and the remarriage. At that moment in time, she was Eshes Ach. Is Nesra Olav Olamis. Okay, so now let's calculate how Rabbi Yochanan would interpret our Mishnah if our Mishnah reflects the sheet of Rabbi Elazar. Why is it that Shneim Cholzos and there's no possibility of Yibum? And the answer is Rabbi Elazar. Because of this logic or this principle of Rabbi Elazar of Shah Achas. So what happens is that as soon as Leah is born, I'm sorry, scratch that. As soon as Shimon dies and Leah falls for Yibum to Levi, at that very moment, a new Iser vis-a-vis Rachel emerges because now she becomes Achos Kukasa. And even after Leah dies or receives Chalitza, we apply and activate the principle of Rabbi Elazar, Kevan shenesra sha'achas, Ishuv Asura Olamis. Nesra Olamis. So why is Rabbi Yochanan so hard-pressed to interpret our Mishnah? Why just assume that our Mishnah reflects that sheet of Rabbi Elazar, who rejects the logic of Rabbi Yochanan that in the case of Rachel, since initially Rachel had a heter, then she became Asura, but now she has a heter again after Leah receives Chalitza. We go back to the original state of heter, and Rabbi Elazar says not like that. Rabbi Elazar holds that once there's a moment of Isur, that Isur remains Olamis. The Erva status can never be removed. Again, we're not talking about the Erva that is removed by Yibum, but we're talking about the Erva before Yibum. Once that Erva was Chal, because in every case of Eshes Ach, we always have the right to establish the potential to remove the Erva of Eshes Ach, if need be, if the conditions of Yibum will arise, but not in this case. Because in this case, says Rabbi Elazar, once he divorces his wife, at this point, he can die without children, but she will not fall for Yibum at this point, after the Gerushin. And if she doesn't fall for Yibum, that generates an Isur Eshes Ach. And we don't consider it as if, well, that Isur Eshes Ach is going to be removed in Yibum if he remarries her and then he divorces her. And then he dies, I'm sorry. So the Gemara answers, no. We're going to prove that this Mishnah could not possibly reflect the sheet of Rabbi Elazar. How so? Be the Sefer. Okay, so now we got to go back to the Sefer. All right, hold on a second. Sorry. See, in this Gemara, you have to turn a lot of pages. Okay. So we're looking now at the Mishnah on Daf Chava. And the Mishnah has Cholzos velo misyabmos. That's the ratio. Just 1 second. Oh, is he referring to Isur Misa? Just 1 second. Isur Mitzvah, the Isur Kedusha. Oh, I see. Yeah. So in the Mishnah, at the end of the second line, it says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. 1 second, I'm wondering if there's a change here in the Girsa. Just give me a second here. Yeah, I'm sorry. You see, it says in our text, Rabbi Eliezer. Do you have that in your text? Back in the Mishnah on Chava. So that's a mistake. It should say Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar Omer, Beit Shammai Omer Yikayin. Yeah. Kodmu Vikonsu. Yotziru, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Beit Shammai Omer Yikayin. Ubeisil Omrim Yotziru. So what happened was that the two brothers were miyavim, the two sisters, and they violated the Isur of Achos Kukasa. And according to Rabbi Elazar, this is an issue that divides Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. What happens to the Eved? Do we force a gerushin? So the Gemara says, "Mida Sefer Rabbi Elazar, Reisha Lav Rabbi Elazar." So this is a principle in the literary rules that govern the Mishnayos when Rebbe writes the Mishnayos. And one of the rules is that if in the Reisha no name is mentioned, and then in the Sefer a specific name is mentioned, then we know that the anonymous Tana in the Reisha is not the same Tana whose opinion appears in the Sefer. And the Gemara is accepting that as a rule. So since Rabbi Elazar's name appears in the Sefer, it means that his opinion is not reflected in the Reisha. And there's a very simple reason why. If Rabbi Elazar was the author of the Reisha, then it would have said at the beginning of the Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar Omer, Arba Achin, Shnayim Em Nesu and Shtei Achios, Mesu, blah, blah, blah. Harelu Choltzos V'lo Misyamos, Omer Rabbi Elazar, Hareza Choltzos V'lo Misyamos. Because this is a reflection of Rabbi Elazar's Shita with regard to Kevon Sha'amda Olav Shah Achas Be'isur Nesra Olav Olamis. Okay. The name of Lahu. Why couldn't Rabbi Yochanan give the following teretz? The naful bivas achas. I guess there was an avalanche of some sort, and both Reuven and Shimon died simultaneously. So Rachel and Leah fall for Yibum simultaneously. And now we have an Isur of Achos Kukasa. So there never was a moment of heter with regard to one of these two Yevamos, whether it be Rachel or Leah, because the Nefila for Yibum was simultaneous on the part of both of them, just like the Misa of Reuven and Shimon was simultaneous. Again, I don't know, that depends on the sugi of Efshel Etzamtem or Efshel Etzamtem, but be that as it may. And therefore, since the Zikas Yibum is Chal simultaneously to both Reuven, to both Rachel and Leah, therefore, there's an Isur Yibum that emerges immediately b'shas nefila for both of them. Okay, so if that be the case, there's no possibility in any scenario whatsoever of allowing for Yibum. And that justifies, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Mishnah's psak that Eina Misyabnos, because Rabbi Yochanan only had a possibility of Yibum to Rachel because Leah was not in the parsha of Yibum at the time that Rachel fell for Yibum to Levi. Now the Gemara says that we have to add another element into this equation, get into the kash on why Rabbi Yochanan didn't give this answer, and that's Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So now we have to know, is it really feasible for two people to die at the same time? Dr. Mitch, I know you have to leave some, but just before you leave us with a last will and testament here. Would you say, I mean, from your knowledge of medicine, and I'll tell you what I, as a total amaretz in medicine, what I would intuitively say, is it feasible for two people to die exactly at the same time? I doubt it. But that's called efshar litzamtzem. And the Gemara in Masechet Bechoros records a machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim about efshar litzamtzem or efshar litzamtzem. And now the Gemara is invoking the Shita Rabbi Yossi Aglili. He holds in Masechet Bechoros efshar litzamtzem. What does that mean? That you can have a reality, a metzius in which two things happen exactly at the same time. So we have a case of Bechar, and a woman gives birth to two male children of first birth, and they both pop their heads out at exactly the same time. Is according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, efshar litzamtzem. We recognize the possibility, b'mitzius, that they both Zecharim, the Keva, both Becharos were born b'vasacha, simultaneously. And the Torah says, in the case of Bechar, and this is Rabbi Yossi Aglili's Gevaldige Chiddush, that Hazcharim Lashem, this is in Parshas Bo, Hazcharim Lashem refers to two Zcharim. According to the Chachamim of Rabbi Yossi, two Zcharim means we're talking in general. You know, in the Alma. The Alma, you can have two Zcharim, but not from one woman, from one Rachel. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili learns that Shnei Zcharim means they were both born simultaneously. And this, according to Rabbi Yossi, is the source for the halacha of efshar litzamtzem. So now it's really amazing. There's a situation in which, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you could have two Zecharim, both of whom have the status of Bechar. That's going to cost you extra money when you have to be poded for the, another 5 shkolim to the Kohen, because they were both born simultaneously, and each one has the same Bechar. And now in the case of Shtei Achios, we're going to assume that both Ruvain and Shimon died simultaneously b'vasachas, and both Leah and Rachel fall for Yibum to Levi simultaneously. And therefore, there was never Shas Heter to activate the principle of Rabbi Yochanan. So why didn't Rabbi Yochanan give this brilliant answer that the two brothers died simultaneously, and the Mishnah reflects the Shita of Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Another rule in the literary book of rules of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. When he writes the Mishnah, he never has a stam Mishnah like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Why, I don't know. What does Rebbe have against Rabbi Yossi Aglili? But he says, Lo sasam latanak Rabbi Yossi Aglili. I suspect that what the Gemara means here is that efshar litzamtzem is a principle that is contradicted by many Mishnayos and Shas. And the assumption all over the place is that efshar litzamtzem. But in any event, in the footnote here, which I think, John, you may have it. I don't know if John is here. In number Yud Aleph, he says that there's a Mishnah in Masechet Shvuos, Kofru Shnei Edom Ke'echad Shneim Chayovim. Right? There's a halacha called Shvuas Ha'edus, and it generates a special chiyuv of a carbon. at the end of Perek Hey of Sefer Vayikra. And the question is, could you have two witnesses, both of whom took the Shvuah simultaneously, denying that they have Eidos, and then later on they admitted, they confessed that they have Eidos and have to bring a carbon. And we want to make sure that the entire kat of Eidos falls apart because it's interdependent, so that they both took the Shvuah simultaneously. And the Gemara says over there, and the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan is activating the principle of toch kidei dibur. Have a good Shabbos. And toch kidei dibur makes two things simultaneous. But in Mitzius, you can never have two things that happen simultaneously. Ain't no such thing. So Rabbi Yochanan goes on record as holding and therefore he's hard pressed to believe that our Mishnah, beginning of the fourth parak of Yevamos, is a stam Mishnah that reflects the Shita Rabbi Yossi that Efshel Tzamtzem. For Lei, why did Rabbi Yochanan give the following answer to Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanin? That why Ashteim Asuras Lisyamim, both Leah and Rachel, to Lo Yadinon, Hai Nafel Bereisha. Maybe we're dealing with Hilchas Fekis over here. Who died first? Ruvain or Shimon? They were both in an accident, and we don't know who actually perished first. So we have a suffix with regard to these Yevamas, which one fell for Yibum first. And therefore the Mishnah says, Asuros Shtehem Lehisyamim. And that means even after the Chalitza to one of the sisters, there's still going to be an Isur Yibum to the other sister, because maybe the other sister fell for Yibum subsequently, and she never had a Heter Yibum. And therefore Rabbi Yochanan's principle would not apply. So the Gemara says, no. Rabbi Yochanan was aware of your possibility, but he rejected it. Why? If the case is we don't know who died first, Hainu Diktani, we could have derived the conclusion about that case from the Mishnah itself. Because it says in the Mishnah, Kadmu v'kansu yotziu. Yotziu means according to base Hillel. Now, if the Mishnah is talking about a case of Safek, we don't know which of the two Achios fell for Yibum first. Is then, in a case of Kadmu v'kansu, why is it Yotziu? Can we bust up a marriage in a case of a Safek? Bishlema Rishon. Let's take, for example, one of the two brothers was Miyabim first, one of the two sisters, is Amrina Leiman Shariloth. Who allowed you to do Yibum? Your Libum was a Yibum Be'isur. Because at this point, both of these women are Asuras Alecha, because each one is Achotz Kukasa. Elasheni. But now let's get to the second brother. When he is Miyabim, why should Alocha be Yotzi? Omar, he will claim that I didn't violate any Isu Yibum. Chavrai, he can point to his Chaver. This is called Tliya, if you're familiar with that concept. He can point to his Chaver, his brother, the first one who was Miyabim, and he could say that Shniya Yibim. What does it mean, Shniya Yibim? The Yibim Shasa, Afshehi Asulo Liyabma Bishuma Chosku Kasa Bikomakom Potar Biyavam Ze Esi Kasa. Right? What are we saying now? We're saying now that the second Yibum should be prohibited because of Achos Kukaso. That doesn't make any sense. Because the first sister is no longer Zkukaso. She had already Yibum. Vana Rishona Miyabme. So the Rishona is Muteres after the Yibum of the Shniya. There's no Achos Kukaso. Because the other one was already subject to Yibum, and therefore she was Niftara Mizika. So what is this? What is this? Anor Rishona miyabim. Just 1 second. The language Rishona, obviously the flip side of Shnia. So he says, Shnia. Or Rishona, Harei Muteres Liachar Yibum Hachnia, Mishum, She'ena Asur Machas Achos Kukas Kevish Hashnia, Niftera Me'azika, Chen Ena Rishona Asur Machma Shenesra Shah Achas, Kevin Shahaisu Muteres, Beshas Nefila, Bechozeres, Letera Rishon. So again, the second brother to be Miyabim is now arguing that he's not violating any Issa. The first one was violating an Issa. Nobody gave him a heter to be Miyabim, but not the second one. Why? What taina does he have in his mouth, in his peh? Avrai Shnia Yibem. I think the word Shnia, let's see if I could prove, if the pshat will bear me out on this. Shnia means she was the second one to fall for Yibum. You follow? Because we have a suffix now. We don't know who died first, Reuven or Shimon. And we'll never know the answer to that question. But when it comes to the turn of the second Ach to be Miyabim, he has a right to say that the first Yibum was on the Shnia. Shnia means the second one to fall for Yibum. And I'm going now to be Miyabim the Rishona. Again, we don't know this, but he has a right to say, let's take into account that possibility that the one that I want to be Miyabim now is the Rishona. And the Rishona, based on the logic of Rabbi Yochanan, had a heter at the time that she fell for Yibum, because she was the Rishona. We don't know she was the Rishona, but he has a right to say maybe she was the Rishona. Maybe she was the Rishona. Or she is the Rishona, if you want to say that. So again, I would counter against this and say, but wait a minute. It's quite possible that it's just the opposite. Maybe the first brother to be Miyabim was Miyabim the Rishona, and you're being Miyabim the Shnia. She never had a heter. Oh, he writes the following. Mikomakom kevan sheyesh kan safek im paga bachos kukaso eino tzorech lahotzi. So I think this is what we were saying before, that you can't break up a marriage based on suffix. But in the first marriage, that we could break up because what's the difference between the first and the second? Just 1 second. Ishleim Rishona Amrina Le Mine Shariole. Oh, I got it. Sorry, I missed that one point. The Rishona, I should say the Rishon. I don't know. There's a Girsa that has Rishon. I think we'll accept the Girsa Rishon if that's okay with you. Because we're talking about the first brother to be Miyabin. He's in trouble. Why? Because the Zika was not removed from the other sister. He's going to be Miyabin one sister, and there was no Hafkas Zika on the other sister. So we don't know who died first. And when he is miyabem, one of them, she's achos kukasa, because both Rachel and Leah fell for Yibam, the two sisters. But the Sheni, who's standing on line, he has one up it, because at this point, the zikas Yibam to the other sister, the one he's not being miyabem, is removed by virtue of the Yibum of his of the first brother. So with regard to the second miyabim, it's a suffix situation. He can't bust up his marriage to the shnia with a suffix. He can always claim, I'm marrying the Rishona. I'm not marrying the shnia, I'm marrying the Rishona. Again, we don't know that, but there's such a possibility, 50-50. So we can't break up the marriage. But in the case of the first brother to be miyabim, we're going to say to Man Sharilach, who allowed you to marry us? She's achos kukas. And the whole logic of Rabbi Yochanan could not apply here, because Rabbi Yochanan's logic is based on the fact that we were mafkia zika, but here we weren't mafkia zika, not at the time that the Rishon was miyabim. So the Mishnah says, at least according to Beis Hillel, that both of them have to divorce their wives if they went ahead and they were miyabim. You can't be talking about a suffix. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan could not give this answer, and therefore, Hainu Dekamar Le. That's why Rabbi Yochanan finally said, "Achayos ein yodeh Mishnah." I throw up my hands in the air, and I don't know who could have authored this Mishnah. Hikshu Rishonim, Harif Hevi Mishnah Kitsurasa, and yet the Rif Paskins like Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't understand this Mishnah. That is a bit of a problem. Okay. In any event, okay. I can't. But I need you to close up. Yeah. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to ask a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan from the Sefer. Tnan, hoisa achas mehen, asura al ha'echad bi'isur erva. If one of these two sisters that fell for Yibam to Levi is, let's say, his mother-in-law or whatever erva, is asur ba umuter ba chosa. So let's say if Rachel is an erva to Levi, then she doesn't fall for Yibam to Levi, and therefore Levi could be miyabem Leah, because Leah is not a chos kukasa, because Rachel could not be a kuka since she's an erva. Ve'asheni asur b'shteihen. But as far as the other brother, let's say Yehuda, is concerned, he cannot be miyabem neither Rachel nor Leah, because neither of them are an erva to him, and therefore there's a zika to both of them, both Rachel and Leah, and achos kukaso generates an isur yibum. Salke daitach the nafla chamoso tchila. Right, one of these two ladies, Rachel or Leah, is chamoso of Levi. And now we're going to assume that Rachel fell for Yibam first, which means that Reuven, her husband, died before Shimon. Okay, so nafla chamosa tchila. let's say that Rachel is Chamotzo and Ruvain died first, and then Shimon dies. So Levi and Rachel are mother-in-law and son-in-law, right? Son-in-law and mother-in-law. And how is that so? In other words, Levi married the daughter of Rachel, and Reuven married Rachel. Shimon is married to Rachel's sister, Leah. Now Reuven dies, and Rachel falls for Yibum. Now again, there are two brothers. There's Levi and Yehuda that's surviving, but Rachel cannot fall for Yibum to Levi because that's her mother-in-law. I mean, that's his mother-in-law, I should say. So the Nefila of Rachel for Yibum was only to Yehuda. And Shimon is excluded here because Shimon is married to Leah. So he cannot possibly be Miyabim Rachel. Again, we have the following scenario. Rachel's situation vis-a-vis Levi is Chamosa. And Leah's situation vis-a-vis Shimon is Achos Ishto. So now Reuven dies, and Rachel falls therefore only in front of Yehuda for Yibum. Now Shimon dies, and Leah falls for Yibum. So the Mishnah says that Levi is allowed to be Miyabim Leah. Why? Because Rachel never fell for Yibum to Leah. She was his mother-in-law. And therefore Leah is not a Chos Kukasa. Now, what about Yehuda? Yehuda now has a problem because with the death of Shimon and the Nefila of Leah to Yibum, both Rachel and Leah are now falling for Yibum in front of Yehuda. And at this point, it's a Chos Kukasa. So therefore, the only possibility of Yibum would be for Levi to be Miyabim Leah. Why? Because Rachel is his mother-in-law. So the Gemara asks, why is it that Yehuda is excluded from being Miyabim both Rachel and Leah? If Rachel fell for Yibum first, then at that point she was Muteres to Yehuda. Later, when Leah falls for Yibum with the death of Shimon, now Rachel becomes Achos Kukaso. But at the moment of her Nefila, she was not Achos Kukaso because Rachel fell for Yibum first. Again, this calculation can only be relevant to Yehuda. It can't be relevant to Levi because Rachel never fell for Yibum to Levi. It's his mother-in-law. But as far as Yehuda is concerned, Rachel fell for Yibum to Yehuda. So why do you assume that Yehuda is excluded from Yibum to both Rachel and Leah just because they're sisters? There was a Shas Heter before Shimon died and Leah fell for Yibum. Vis-a-vis Rachel, was a Shas Heter. Is Leku chasan uliyamim hach the eno chamosa bereisha. So again, Levi is a son-in-law to Rachel. Okay, now he's going to be miyabim Leah. According to Rabbi Yochanan's logic, once he's miyabim Leah, Yehuda should be allowed to be miyabim Rachel. The eno chamosa bereisha. Eno chamosa is a reference to Leah. Leah's eno chamosa. Of course, Rachel is chamosa. So this is going to be a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. Why does the Mishnah exclude Yehuda from Yibum? According to Rabbi Yochanan, since Rachel died first, since Ruvain died first, and Rachel therefore fell for Yibum first, she was in a state of heter, and now, once Levi will be miyabem Leah, as we explained, now Yehuda should be able to be miyabem Rachel. Tehevi chamoso legabi idach ki yevamot shehutra v'nesra v'chaz v'hutra is tachsal letera rishon. According to Rabbi Yochanan, Yehuda should be allowed to be miyabem Rachel after Levi is miyabem Leah. Omar Papa, Kigon de nafla hachti eno chamoso bareisha. Who died? Who died first? It was Shimon who died first. So the first one to fall for Yibum was Leah. Is Memela, everything fits into place now according to Rabbi Yochanan. Because if Shimon died first and Leah fell for Yibum to Levi and Yehuda, so as far as Leah is concerned, she has a heter Yibum to both Levi and Yehuda. Now Ruvain dies and Rachel falls for Yibum. So Yehuda cannot marry either one of them, neither Leah nor Rachel. Why? Because since they both share a Zika simultaneously, we have now an erva called Achos Kukasa. Levi, on the other hand, is allowed to be miyabim Leah because Rachel never fell for Yibam to Levi, it was his mother-in-law. So now let's see what happens. Let's work out the scenario. Levi goes ahead, he's miyabim Leah, which he's allowed to do. But the problem is that Yehuda can't be miyabim Rachel because Rachel never had a shas heter. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan's principle could not possibly apply. Now, we have 2 more minutes. I'll just very quickly, the Mishnah says in the name of Rabbi Lazar, Beit Shammai omrim yekaimu, Beit Hillel omrim lo yotziu. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Eliezer omer, Beit Shammai omrim yekaimu, Beit Hillel omrim yotziu. Rabbi Shimon omer, everybody agrees yekaimu. He denies that Beit Hillel, he denies that Beit Hillel holds Yotziu. Omer, Kal Hoyel Lahem LeBeit Hillel B'Davar Zeh. Shebeit Shammai Omer Yotziu, Beit Hillel Omer Yekaimu. In other words, Abishol agrees that there's a machlokes, as we originally had it in Rabbi Lezer, but he switches around the shitos. because he wants to make sure that at Beis Hillel are the Mekilim. So Gemara asks Rabbi Shimon Kiman. Rabbi Shimon holds that everybody agrees Yikaimu. Ike Beit Shammai, Hainu Rabbi Eliezer. Because Rabbi Eliezer has the tradition that Beit Shammai were the Mekilim and they said Yikaimu. And now the Gemara thinks Rabbi Shimon is not adding anything to what we already know from Rabbi Eliezer. Ike Beis Hillel. Sha'omar Rabbi Shimon Beis Hillel Sobrim Yikaimu is Hainu Abba Shaul. Abba Shaul holds that according to Beis Hillel Yikaimu. So what is Rabbi Shimon adding here when he says Yikaimu? Again, Mimonavsha. If Yikaimu means he's holding like Beit Shammai, that's exactly what Rabbi Eliezer said, that Beit Shammai holds Yikaimu. And if, on the other hand, Rabbi Shimon is coming to add Ki Beis Hillel, that it's Beis Hillel holds Yikaimu, then Hainu Abba Shaul. That's exactly what we learned from Abba Shaul, that it's Nafka Beis Hillel who said Yikaimu. So what is Rabbi Shimon coming to add? And the Gemara answers, Hochi Kamar. Shelo nechleku Beit Shammai Beis Hillel b'davar zeh. What Rav Shimon wants to add here, which we don't have neither in Rabbi Eliezer nor in Abba Shaul, is that there never was a machlokas. That even Beis Hillel from the get-go are on board and agree Yikaimu. Okay, then? So that's where we'll call it here on Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph, and we're up to Hoisa Achas Mihen. So how many lines up is from the bottom? About 8 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 8 lines up from the bottom. Okay, gentlemen. So the next year will be exactly on time. I'm just going to run out to a bris now. And if I don't see you, I wish you Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And thanks for being flexible on the change of the hour.
Okay, and Mazel Tov.
Thanks.